Jerusalem. So the Lord surrounds his people as the mountains surround Jerusalem. So the Lord surrounds his people. Surround us, Lord. Surround us, O Lord. We need to be in your presence. Hard to hear and grace my fears relieve. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know there's days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace.
All right, welcome back everyone to our study of Psalms as we delve back in following our holiday break. I hope you had a good one. I hope you're excited as we come into a new year, 2023, and are looking forward to the prospects. And we'll get it started today back in our study with Psalm 27. Psalm 27, picking up where we left off last time. Attributed to David in the superscript, as most Psalms are, certainly towards the beginning of the book. But beyond that, we don't find anything within it. No context clues that would point to David specifically, or to a particular occasion in his life when it might have been penned. But it is clear, with a rather superficial reading, that just from the psalm itself, that he was being pursued by his enemies. He's shut out from the house of the Lord. He's being subjected to cruel slander, as we've seen with some other psalms up to this point. And again, as we said with those, it could fit a number of different occasions in David's rather adventurous life. Brother Waycaster, in his commentary, titles this one Faith of the Soldier, and I think that's a rather fitting title. A couple of others that other scholars have suggested: Weight and Confidence, Also fitting. Sunshine and shadow, wait upon the Lord, and the triumph of a warrior's faith. So clearly, this idea of soldiers, warriors, is rather evident in the psalm. So we'll start out by reading through it as we always do. I'll give you a quick outline that we'll follow here. But I wanted to note in passing. I try to remind you all of this as we're starting in, as I'm kind of primarily using Brother Waycaster's thoughts to kind of work our way through it to give us a skeleton and some things to hone in on. He does use the American Standard Version. I'm using the King James. So sometimes if you're wondering why is, as I read through it, it's one way. Sometimes if I'm looking at a particular note here, it's a bit different. That's why. It's KJV versus ASV. And there is one verse in particular towards the end of this psalm that has a wonky translation issue from Hebrew to English. If I recall correctly, though, the two render it similarly, so that may or may not be a concern. But anyway, here's a good outline for this one, provided by Mike Vestal, gospel preacher in Texas, if I'm not mistaken. Clearly a fan of alliteration. So if you love alliteration, here's a good one for you. He has it broken down into four parts. First, the soldier warring, verses 1 through 3. The soldier worshiping, verses 4 through 6. The soldier walking, verses 7 through 12. And the soldier waiting, verses 13 and 14. Okay, so starting out, we'll read through it and then circle back just a bit. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, come upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion, in the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me, he shall set me up upon a rock. Now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy also upon me, and answer me. When thou saidst, seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not, excuse me, hide not thy face far from me. Put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of mine enemies. Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Yea, or wait, I say, on the Lord. Okay, so the first three verses picture the soldier warring, as we alluded to in the outline just a moment ago. The Lord is my light. You might note Micah 7:8, Psalms 84:11, certainly Psalm 119:105, right? Thy words a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. And it's worth noting here, in various other passages throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New, that the Lord is the light, right? He certainly supplies light, but he is in fact the light. So it goes beyond merely the notion of supplying light to mankind. Darkness, of course, suggests distress, trouble, and sorrow, and light is the opposite of all of these things. So the Lord is his light and his salvation. In the Old Testament in particular, salvation often has, if not most of the time, a reference to deliverance from physical danger. Right? So oftentimes in the Psalms, when the psalmist speaks of salvation, he's talking about literally escaping, in a physical sense, from enemies who would seek to do him harm. And that certainly seems to be the case here in Psalm 27. But there's also the spiritual element present. Certainly Psalm 51 probably chief among the Psalms, really drives at that notion. Salvation in a sense of one's soul from the problem of sin. So this warrior, David, the Lord is his light, his salvation, and the strength of his life. Describing a stronghold or a fortress. You might note Psalm 18:2 and 46:1. And of course, in light of these things, the obvious question, of whom shall I be afraid? A rhetorical question, the answer is no one. Certainly not the enemies that he goes on to mention in the next two verses. When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, there's a picture for you. They stumbled and fell. Though an host or an army should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. The war should rise up against me. In this will I be confident. So it's clear that this is a substantial enemy. He definitely seems to have, he definitely has cause for concern. He says, and host should encamp against me, right? This is a massive enemy. It's certainly more than one. Again, in a physical sense, but there's also the spiritual application. The great enemy, Satan and his host who would war against us. But this is a vicious enemy, right? I mentioned the imagery here. They came upon me to eat up my flesh, but they stumbled and fell. It's violent, brutal, wicked. They are waging war against the psalmist, but they are ultimately going to lose. The war should rise up against me, and this will I be confident. And what will he be confident? In the Lord, and in the salvation that he is certain the Lord will provide, as he has in times past. Okay, so start out the psalm with this warlike image of the psalmist at war. Violent, substantial enemies encompassing him, and yet he has hope. He has certainty of salvation from the situation at hand. Verses 4 through 6, we find the soldier worshiping. Now, it's easy to point out, right, that a person in this position could easily be overwhelmed by fear and discouragement. I mean, you turn on the news today, this conflict in Eastern Europe with Russia and Ukraine that's been going on for months now, I guess coming up upon a year in February. You look at some of the images, you read some of the accounts, and for me personally, it's hard to imagine being, especially if you have, say a small family, you have a wife, small children, and you have these vicious rocket attacks. In some cases, soldiers who are occupying cities going door to door to harass, torment people, or worse. To have to live with the constant fear of that, the constant fear of knowing that these soldiers could come knocking on your door, who clearly outarm you, outgun you, or the fact that these drones and rockets could come falling out of the sky at any moment, just randomly targeting civilians, yourself included. It's easy to become overwhelmed, right? To become so fearful, so discouraged that you feel like giving in and giving up. If you reflect upon the life of David, as I mentioned earlier, when in introducing the psalm, clearly there's an occasion here where he's in a difficult situation. It involves armed enemies. He's out there. He's in some kind of a fight. He's away from the temple, as we see here in verse 4. Despite all the things he faced with Saul, with his own son, with all of the various conflicts he was engaged in, the Philistines, for example, in spite of all those trials and all those challenges, he continued to profess a faith in God, and certainly as you work through the Psalms, you see that time and time again. To have this kind of an attitude, this kind of a disposition, that one thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after. Right? It could be any number of things. Right? I mean, to have his enemies wiped out, to be delivered from them. Not saying that he doesn't want those things. Clearly, within the psalm itself, he does. But the one thing that he desires more than anything else, the one thing he's going to seek after, is to dwell in the house of his Lord all the days of his life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, to inquire in his temple. And again, this verse is the reason why we say that whatever the situation is, whatever the occasion for the psalm, it's clear that something is keeping him away from the temple where he would certainly go to worship. But of all the things that he could want and need and desperately desire in that kind of a terrible situation, number one is worshiping the Lord, to be right with God. It reminds me a little bit of Paul in his letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 11, listing all these terrible things that had afflicted him. The beatings, the shipwreck, the stonings, and chief among them, the very last thing on his list, the care for all the churches. Right? It's like you've got all this stuff going on, all these terrible things happening to him. But the worst of all, for Paul, is knowing that his fellow brethren are out there, that they're struggling, that they're being persecuted in the same way, that they're dealing with spiritual life or death matters like that, like what he discusses in the epistle to the Galatians. Is similar here. Of all the things that the psalmist has going on in the terrible situation that he is, his number one concern is his spiritual standing with God. Certainly how it ought to be. Probably how I think most people would answer the question. If you were in this situation, what would you want more than anything? They'd probably say this. It's one thing to say that or to want it, but to actually do it speaks volumes about the psalmist himself. In the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock. Places of safety, right? Places of refuge, places where this enemy cannot get to him. Now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, you will sing praises unto the Lord. Again, absolute certainty. He doesn't hedge at all here. It isn't, well, maybe I'll be delivered, maybe I won't. Right? Maybe with God's help I'll come out victorious in this matter. Maybe I won't. It's going to happen, and he speaks as if it's already accomplished. Again, certainly, thank you. Certainly the kind of attitude that one ought to have, but again, not always the easiest to actually have it in the heat of such a moment. All right, verses 7 through 12. So we've seen the soldier warring. We've seen the soldier worshiping, expressing his desire to be there in the temple, worshiping God, to find refuge in these metaphorical places of safety, to offer praise, sacrifices of joy, singing praises unto the Lord, right? Assuming it's as good as done that his head is going to be lifted up above his enemies. Here we have the soldier walking, and it's interesting if you're kind of reading through this, it may be that you couldn't really help but notice yourself that here at verse 7, there's an obvious change of mood. It's like you're reading along, and then the switch flips, and it's so dramatic. In fact, Brother Wakeaster notes that some scholars suppose that these used to be two separate psalms that got stitched together by some editor along the way. Because when you're working your way through, you got this one mood in the first 6 verses, and then it flips a bit, but not necessarily so. Not saying it couldn't be, but it doesn't necessarily present a problem, I don't think. I mean, as he notes here, right, this is from Burton Kaufman. It says, every Christian has experienced that swift transition from jubilation to fearful apprehension, and it's not unreasonable to suppose such a swift change on the part of the author here. It could certainly be. You've got that absolute confidence, and then it shifts just a bit to a bit of apprehension. He implores God to hear when he cries with his voice, to have mercy, and to answer. And I don't think that's at all to mean that there's any kind of expectation on his part or fear on his part that God won't answer, but rather he is crying out to the one that he knows can help him. And verse 8 is the one that I mentioned in the introduction. That's an awkward rendering from Hebrew to English. He notes here the order of the words in the original language. If you were to just transliterate it, or not transliterate it, but translate it word for word in the order it's originally found. It says, "To thee said my heart, seek ye my face. Thy face, Lord, will I seek." Um, the King James inserted three words that aren't in the original to read, or to render it, "When thou saidst, seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek." um, he notes here that the American Standard Version is essentially the same. It isn't terribly different from the King James. So it emphasizes the determination of the psalmist to pursue God and to trust in Him. So two thoughts that come out of this. One, God had communicated with David, instructing him to search out the face of the Almighty. Right. So God has extended some knowledge, some this expectations communicated to David that David ought to seek after God. Something you find throughout Scripture, going all the way back to Genesis. You find it all the way through to the New Testament as well. And then two, the psalmist has determined to take advantage of God's overtures and put forth the initiative to thus find God. I cannot help but think of Psalm 19, which we've mentioned before. Right, there you have creation presented as evidence of something that points to God's existence, but then he goes on to talk about the laws, the statutes, the ordinances of God, all of God's revelation to mankind, giving man insight into what God expects, how we are to live, and so forth. So here in Psalm 27:8, God says, "Seek ye my face," right, which is God's plea to mankind, right? Seek after me. And there's some effort involved in it. Yes, God has given revelation to mankind. He has revealed a great deal about what he expects, what we would have from us as his creation. But there's effort involved in finding it out. There's seeking after God. There's making the inquiry. There's approaching God's word, studying, meditating, coming to an understanding, and then making application of it. So God says, "Seek my face." The psalmist, "And my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek." So it's an active decision upon his part that he is going to seek after God. And then he goes on to say, "Hide not thy face far from me, put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation." Right? So yes, he's going to seek after God, but I think there's an understanding implicit here, and perhaps it's a little bit of what you find in Psalm 51 that we mentioned earlier as well. And maybe I think also of Isaiah chapter 6. In the sense that, yes, God has said, "Seek after me." I'm going to seek after him, but perhaps at times I don't necessarily feel worthy of it. Why I want to seek after God, but why would God want me seeking after him? Why would God want anything to do with me? Hide not thy face far from me, put not thy servant away in anger. You've been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. He's going to seek after God, and he's imploring God to, you almost get the picture of not moving away. It's you can almost picture, here comes David seeking after God, and you get the picture of God almost saying as if, "Oh, here he comes, let me move away." And David saying, "No, please don't do that. I know I'm not I know I'm not worthy. I'm an unprofitable servant. Don't put away thy servant in anger. Don't hide your face from me." Again, clearly a different tone, a different mood from what we saw earlier in the psalm, but again, not so different that it still doesn't fit together. "When my mother and my father forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." Man, can you? I mean, that's now. Brother Waycaster notes this too, as I was just about to say. There's no indication that this happened, that David's parents actually forsook him. But I mean, in terms of you think about perhaps hyperbole, metaphor. How bad a situation are you if your own parents forsake you, if they leave you behind and will have nothing more to do with you? I mean, it's about as bad as it can get. If you're thinking about being abandoned, about being alone, about being rejected, there you go. But David says, even should that happen, I know the Lord wouldn't do it. Again, verse 9, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about verse 9. I don't think he has the expectation that this is going to happen, that God's going to hide his face or God's going to put him away in anger. I don't think it's good. He doesn't think that's going to happen at all. But rather, there's this sense that he has that, who am I, right? Who am I for the Lord to be concerned for me the way that he is? But in verse 10, he expresses the confidence, right? So that's why I say that the change in mood is clear, but don't read too much into it. I don't think. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path. And now this is interesting because you can just take the first part of verse 11 by itself, and it's a thought that you find throughout the Psalms, going all the way back to Psalm 1. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path. Or you might even go back to the very beginning of this psalm. The Lord is my light. A lamp to my feet, a light to my path, as you find in Psalm 119. But he gives a reason for it. Why is it that he wants the Lord to teach him and to lead him in a plain path? Because of my enemies, right? There's a reason for him to seek after God and to learn God's ways and follow after them. Because enemies are out there. Again, going back to the beginning of the psalm, verses 2 and 3, they're everywhere. They're vicious. They're all around him. They're substantial. And because of that, he wants to be taught and led in a plain path by the Lord. Take the spiritual application. Why is it that one should want to bother to be taught of the Lord, to be led in a plain path? I mean, you could say, rightly so, for its own sake, right? Because I recognize that God created me, and I want to seek after him and follow after him. Even so, what about the enemy in a spiritual sense? Hopefully I'm motivated in a positive sense, but even if I'm not, I understand that there's a spiritual enemy out there in the world. And so I don't want to fall prey to that, so I will seek after the Lord and follow in his path, just like David. Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. Coming back again to these enemies that are round about him, not only do we have what we found in verses 2 and 3, that they're wicked, they come to eat up his flesh, they're a host encamping around him, they're warring, they're rising up against him. Not only that, false witnesses are rising up against him, and they are breathing out cruelty. So people are slandering him, people are telling lies against him. So it's a terrible situation. I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Right? So it's almost to say here in verse 13, but for this, right? But for the goodness that the Lord shows, I would be finished. Right? His situation is so bad. These enemies who not only are threatening violence against him, but are slandering and defaming him. God is the one thing that helps him to keep hanging on. Otherwise, he would have given up. Verse 14. Closing thoughts. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. He hasn't given up because of the goodness of the Lord. He has this absolute faith that God has delivered him before, God will deliver him again. He's going to seek after God. He is going to be a diligent servant of God, come what may. And he understands that that's what he needs to do if he wants to have any hope whatsoever of coming out alive against these enemies. Again, physical enemies here. There's certainly the spiritual application to be made as well. But wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he will strengthen thine heart. In other words, don't give up. Don't give in. Even though the situation may be bad. And again, verses 2 and 3, and then also verse 12 in particular, out of the whole psalm, really capture the seriousness of the situation that he's in. But even so, keep the faith. Don't give up. And if you do, God will strengthen thine heart, and you're going to come out on top, just as David himself certainly did. All right, so that is Psalm 27. Again, this theme of a soldier, of a warrior, and his faith and his spiritual concerns and condition, even in a time of tremendous trial. So, a very good psalm. Lord willing, next time we will continue on with Psalm 28, another psalm attributed to David. Thank you very much for your kind attention today.
Over all the earth, you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams, in my darkest hour. You are the Lord of all I am, so won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord, 'cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing, so won't you reign in me